If she ever touches anything in my house again, I will make sure she never works in this city again. The words landed like ice across the marble floor, sharp, final, and impossible to ignore. Ethan Carter did not raise his voice often, but when he did, people listened. Standing in the center of his sprawling penthouse overlooking Manhattan, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, he did not even look at the woman he was speaking to. Lily Brooks stood near the edge of the room, a cleaning cloth still in her hand, her fingers trembling just enough to betray what her face refused to show. She lowered her gaze, nodding once, quietly. "Yes, sir." The room fell silent again, except for the faint hum of the city far below. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks as if nothing had happened, already moving on, already forgetting. To him, she was not a person. She was a function, a background detail, something that existed only when needed and disappeared when not. And yet, as he walked past her, he did not notice the small bottle resting on the side table behind him, slightly out of place, its label barely misaligned. Lily noticed. She always noticed. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. That night, the city outside glowed in cold blue light, but inside the penthouse, everything felt even colder. Lily moved quietly from room to room, restoring order to a life that was never truly hers. She straightened the books on the shelf, aligned the silverware in the kitchen, and paused only once, her eyes returning to that same bottle. It did not belong there. She was certain of it. She had memorized every inch of this place, every object, every routine. That was how you survived in a world where no one saw you. You learned everything, and you spoke nothing. From the living room, Ethan's voice echoed faintly through a phone call, sharp and impatient. "I do not care what it costs. Fix it." His tone carried the weight of someone used to control, someone who believed problems disappeared the moment he demanded it. But when the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. He pressed his fingers briefly to his temple, just for a second, as if something inside his head pulsed too hard, too fast. Then he dropped his hand and walked toward his office without another word. Lily watched from the hallway, unseen as always. Something was wrong. Not just with the bottle. Not just with the room. Something deeper. Something that did not belong. And for the first time since she had stepped into this house, she felt it clearly. A quiet, creeping certainty that whatever was coming next would change everything. Even if the man who owned this world never noticed her at all. The apartment was quiet again after Ethan disappeared into his office, but Lily did not move right away. She stood in the hallway, her fingers still wrapped around the cloth, her eyes fixed on the faint reflection of the city lights against the polished floor. In a place this large, silence was never empty. It carried weight. It pressed down on every corner, every object, every breath. She exhaled slowly, then turned and resumed her routine, because routine was the only thing that kept her steady. In the kitchen, she checked the schedule she had memorized by heart. Breakfast ingredients were already prepared for the morning. Supplements were arranged in precise order. Coffee beans measured, water filtered, everything exactly the way he preferred. She moved with quiet precision, adjusting a cup by a fraction of an inch, wiping a surface that already looked clean. No one ever praised her for it. No one ever noticed. But if anything was wrong, even slightly, he would. That was the rule of this place. Perfection was invisible. Mistakes were not. Hours later, when her shift ended, Lily stepped out into the cold Manhattan night, pulling her thin coat tighter around herself. The wind cut sharply between the buildings, nothing like the controlled stillness of the penthouse above. She walked 3 blocks, then turned into a narrow street lined with older buildings, the kind most people with money never saw. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, no elevator, just a narrow staircase that creaked under each step. Inside, the space was small, barely enough for a bed, a table, and a tiny kitchen area, but it was clean. It was hers. On the table sat an open notebook, pages filled with careful handwriting, diagrams, and notes. Medical terms, dosages, observations. Lily set her bag down and immediately moved to it, scanning the page as if continuing a conversation she had paused only minutes ago. She picked up a pen and added a few more lines, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. This was her second life, the one no one in that penthouse would ever imagine. She was not just a maid. She was learning. Slowly, quietly, building knowledge one night at a time. Not for ambition, not for recognition, but because she had no other choice. From the other side of the thin wall, a faint cough echoed. Lily froze for a moment, then quickly moved toward the small bedroom. Inside, a young boy lay asleep, his breathing uneven, his face pale under the dim light. She stepped closer, gently placing the back of her hand against his forehead, checking his temperature with a practiced touch. Her expression softened, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "I am here," she whispered, though he did not wake. She adjusted the blanket, making sure it was tucked just right, then sat beside him for a few seconds longer than she allowed herself. This was why she endured everything. Every harsh word, every moment of being unseen, every night that stretched too long, and every morning that came too soon. She stood and returned to the table, her eyes falling again on her notes. The words blurred for a moment as exhaustion crept in, but she pushed through it. She always did. Because somewhere between the silence of that penthouse and the quiet struggle of this small apartment, she had learned one simple truth. No one was coming to save her. And if she wanted to protect the only person who mattered, she had to become the one who could. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of her existence, unaware of the fragile line she walked every single day. And miles above, in a world of glass and steel, Ethan Carter poured himself another drink, unaware that the one person he dismissed so easily was the only one who might soon understand what was happening to him before anyone else did. The next morning began like every other, precise, controlled, and quietly tense. Lily arrived before sunrise, letting herself into the penthouse with the same silent efficiency she had perfected over time. The city outside was still waking up, but inside, everything was already expected to be flawless. She moved through the kitchen first, setting the coffee machine, arranging the breakfast tray, and placing each item exactly where it belonged. Eggs prepared the way he preferred, fruits sliced evenly, supplements lined in a perfect row. But today, something felt different. Not in the room itself, but in the air. A subtle shift. A faint unease that refused to settle. She carried the tray toward the dining area, just as Ethan stepped out of his office. His posture was as sharp as ever, his expression unreadable, but there was a slight delay in his movement, a fraction of a second where his hand brushed against the wall for balance. It was so small that anyone else would have missed it. Lily did not. "Your breakfast," she said quietly, setting the tray down. He gave a short nod without looking at her, already scrolling through something on his phone. "Leave it." His voice was steady, but there was a tightness beneath it. Lily stepped back, but her eyes lingered for just a moment longer than usual. His skin looked slightly pale under the morning light. There was a faint shadow beneath his eyes, darker than the night before. He had not slept. Or if he had, it had not been enough. She turned to leave, but then paused when he reached for the small row of bottles beside his plate. His hand hesitated, just for a second. Then he picked one up and swallowed the contents without question. Lily's gaze dropped immediately to the label. That bottle. It was the same one from last night. The one that did not belong. Her chest tightened slightly, but she said nothing. She could not. Not yet. The rest of the morning unfolded as expected on the surface, but underneath, the cracks began to show. Ethan moved through his calls with increasing impatience, his tone sharper, his words cutting faster than usual. At one point, he pressed his fingers against his temple again. This time longer, his jaw tightening, as if something inside his head pulsed harder than before. "Reschedule everything afternoon," he snapped into the phone. "I do not care what the excuse is." He ended the call abruptly, tossing the phone onto the table with more force than necessary. Lily stood in the hallway, half hidden by the wall, watching without being seen. She noticed the way his breathing had changed, slightly uneven, the way his shoulders carried tension that did not release. And most of all, she noticed the pattern. It was not random. It was building. Later, as he left for a meeting, Lily moved quickly back into the dining area. The bottles were still there. She approached slowly, her fingers hovering for a moment before she picked one up. The label looked correct at first glance, but something about the print was off. Slightly misaligned. Slightly different from the others she had memorized. She turned it carefully in her hand, her eyes narrowing as she studied it. This was not part of his routine. She was certain of that. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from recognition. This was not just a mistake. Mistakes did not repeat themselves this precisely. Mistakes did not hide this well. She placed the bottle back exactly where it had been, adjusting it by a fraction so it matched the others perfectly. Then she stepped back, her mind already racing ahead. She needed to confirm it. She needed to be sure. Because if she was right, then whatever was happening inside this house was not just dangerous. It was deliberate. And Ethan Carter, the man who believed he controlled everything, was walking straight into something he could not see at all. That evening, the penthouse felt different in a way that could not be seen, but could be felt in every quiet corner. Lily moved through the space with the same careful rhythm, but her awareness had sharpened. Every object, every sound, every shift in routine now carried meaning. She no longer cleaned on instinct alone. She observed. She measured. She remembered. Ethan returned later than usual, the sound of the door closing echoing slightly louder than normal in the stillness. His steps were slower. Not enough for anyone unfamiliar to notice, but Lily did. She always did. He loosened his tie as he walked in, his expression tight, his focus distant. "You are still here," he said without looking at her, his tone flat, almost dismissive. Lily lowered her gaze slightly. "I had to finish the evening schedule." He did not respond. Instead, he walked past her toward the bar, pouring himself a drink with a hand that was steady only because he forced it to be. He took a sip, then paused, his shoulders stiffening for a brief second, as if something inside him resisted the motion. Lily noticed the hesitation. Again, a pattern. Not random, not imagined. She turned back to her task, but her mind stayed on him. A few minutes later, she quietly adjusted the thermostat by a small degree. Earlier, she had noticed the faint sheen of sweat along his temple despite the cool air. Now she compensated without a word. Then she moved to the kitchen and prepared a cup of herbal tea, the kind known to ease tension and support sleep. She placed it on the side table near his usual seat, not announcing it, not drawing attention, just leaving it there, the way she always did. Ethan did not thank her. He did not even acknowledge it. But later, when he sat down, he reached for the cup without thinking and took a slow sip. His expression did not change, but his shoulders lowered slightly, just enough to release a fraction of the tension he carried. Lily saw it from the reflection in the glass wall. Invisible kindness. Unseen, but not without effect. As the night deepened, Ethan moved toward his office again. But this time he stopped halfway, pressing his hand against the edge of the table. His breathing shifted, shallow for a moment, then forced back to normal. He straightened quickly, glancing around as if to make sure no one had noticed. Lily had already turned away, pretending to wipe a surface that was already clean. She gave him the dignity of not being seen in weakness. That was her quiet rule. But inside, her certainty grew stronger. Something was wrong, and it was getting worse. When Ethan finally disappeared behind the office door, Lily moved back to the dining area. The bottles were still there, aligned perfectly, untouched except for the one he had taken earlier. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface of the table before she picked up the same bottle again. This time, she held it longer, studying not just the label, but the weight, the texture, the way the cap sealed. It looked right, but it did not feel right. She closed her eyes for a brief second, recalling every detail she had memorized over weeks, over months. Then she opened them again, sharper, more certain. This was not part of his system. And Ethan Carter did not tolerate irregularities in his system, which meant one thing. This was not his doing. She placed the bottle back exactly as it had been and stepped away, her movements calm, controlled, but her thoughts racing beneath the surface. She needed proof. Not suspicion, not instinct. Proof. Because without it, she was just a maid speaking out of place. And in this house, that meant being ignored at best, removed at worst. But as she turned off the lights one by one, preparing to leave, she glanced once more toward the closed office door. Inside, the man who believed he controlled everything sat alone, unaware that the smallest unnoticed detail in his perfectly ordered world was already beginning to unravel him from the inside out. And for the first time, Lily did not just feel concern. She felt urgency. The storm arrived without warning, rolling over the city in heavy waves of rain that struck the glass walls of the penthouse like distant applause. Lightning flickered across the skyline, briefly illuminating the empty rooms in cold flashes of white. Inside, everything seemed still, but beneath that stillness, something was breaking. Lily had just finished organizing the last of the evening tasks when a sharp sound cut through the silence. It was not loud, but it was wrong. A glass hitting the floor. She froze for half a second, then turned toward the direction of Ethan's office. Another sound followed, this time heavier. A dull impact that echoed deeper, more final. Her body moved before her thoughts could catch up. She rushed down the hallway and pushed the office door open without knocking. Ethan Carter was on the floor. One hand braced against the edge of his desk, the other pressed tightly against his chest. His breathing was uneven, shallow, as if each breath required effort. His face had lost its usual controlled expression, replaced by something raw and unguarded. Pain. For a moment, he looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes, as if he did not understand how he had ended up there. What? His voice was strained, barely steady. Lily dropped to her knees beside him, her movements fast but precise. "Do not try to stand," she said, her voice calm despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. Her eyes scanned him quickly, taking in every detail. Skin pale, sweat along his temple, breathing irregular. She had seen symptoms like this before, not in a hospital, but in textbooks, in late-night study sessions under dim light. Pieces connected rapidly in her mind. This was not just exhaustion. This was something worse. "Stay with me," she said softly, placing her hand lightly against his shoulder to keep him from pushing himself up. He tried anyway, stubborn even in weakness, but his arm gave out beneath him. His body collapsed slightly, and for the first time, real fear crossed his face. The kind that came when control slipped away completely. Lily reached for her phone with one hand, dialing emergency services, her voice steady as she gave the address, the symptoms, every detail she could gather in seconds. Then she set the phone on speaker and returned her full attention to him. "Listen to me," she said, her tone firm now, anchoring him. "You need to stay still." His breathing grew more uneven, a slight tremor running through his body. "What is happening to me?" he managed to say, his voice breaking through the tension. Lily did not answer that question. Not yet. Instead, she adjusted his position carefully, supporting his back, making sure his airway remained clear, her movements guided by instinct sharpened through months of quiet study and constant observation. "You are going to be fine," she said, even though she did not know if that was true. She needed him to believe it. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. The sound of rain against the glass grew louder, mixing with the faint echo of sirens somewhere in the distance. Ethan's grip tightened briefly against her arm, not out of strength, but out of instinct, as if holding onto the only thing that felt real in that moment. Lily did not pull away. She stayed exactly where she was, steady, present, unshaken. For the first time since she had entered his world, she was not invisible. She was the only thing keeping him grounded. And as the sirens grew closer, cutting through the storm outside, one truth settled heavily into the room. The man who had everything was now completely powerless. And the woman he had treated like nothing was the only reason he was still conscious at all. The ambulance lights painted the walls of the penthouse in flashes of red and white as paramedics rushed in, their voices sharp and controlled, cutting through the tension that still lingered in the air. Lily stepped back just enough to give them space, but she did not leave. She stayed close, her eyes fixed on Ethan as they assessed him quickly, attaching monitors, asking questions he could barely answer. Male, mid-30s, unstable breathing, possible cardiac or neurological involvement. One of them said, already preparing to move him. "What happened?" another asked, glancing briefly at Lily. She answered without hesitation, her voice steady despite everything. "Sudden collapse, disorientation, irregular breathing, progressive symptoms over the last few days." The paramedic gave her a quick look, recognizing the clarity in her response, then nodded. "Good. Stay back." But Lily did not fully step away. As they lifted Ethan onto the stretcher, his eyes shifted again, unfocused but searching. For a moment, they landed on her. Not with authority, not with dismissal, but with something else. Uncertainty. And beneath it, a quiet reliance he did not yet understand. His fingers moved slightly, as if reaching for something, then fell back as the paramedics secured him in place. "We are moving," one of them called out. The doors closed behind them, and the storm outside swallowed the sound of the sirens as they rushed into the night. Lily stood frozen for a brief second in the now empty penthouse, the silence returning too quickly, too suddenly. Then she grabbed her coat and followed. The hospital was bright, sterile, and unforgiving. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as doctors and nurses moved with practiced urgency. Ethan was wheeled past double doors, disappearing into a restricted area where only medical staff were allowed. Lily stopped just outside, her hands tightening slightly at her sides. For a moment, she hesitated. This was the line, the invisible boundary between her world and his. She was not family. She was not listed as anything important. She was just the maid. And yet, she stayed. Minutes passed, then stretched into something longer. A nurse approached her, clipboard in hand. "Are you a relative?" she asked, her tone neutral but direct. Lily shook her head. "No," the nurse paused. "Then you will need to wait outside." Lily nodded slowly, stepping back into the waiting area, but her eyes never left the doors. Time moved differently there. Slower. Heavier. Every second carried uncertainty. After what felt like far too long, a doctor finally stepped out, removing his gloves, his expression serious. "We have stabilized him for now," he said to no one in particular, then glanced at Lily. "He is in critical condition. We are running tests." Lily took a small step forward. "What caused it?" she asked quietly. The doctor studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "We do not know yet. There are signs that do not fully match a typical case. We need more information." Lily's heart tightened slightly. Signs that do not match. That confirmed what she already suspected. This was not normal. As the doctor walked away, Lily remained standing there, the weight of everything settling deeper. She reached into her coat pocket slowly and pulled out a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. The bottle, the one she had taken before leaving. She held it tightly in her hand, her mind already connecting the pieces, already moving ahead. Inside that room, Ethan Carter lay surrounded by machines, monitored, controlled, but still vulnerable in a way he had never been before. And out here, in the quiet space no one paid attention to, stood the only person who had seen the truth before it happened. Not because she had power, not because she had authority, but because she had been there, watching, learning, and refusing to look away when something did not feel right. The storm outside had not yet passed, and neither had what was coming next. The waiting area outside the intensive care unit felt colder than the storm outside, even though the lights were bright and the air was steady. Lily sat still, her hands resting in her lap, the small wrapped bottle hidden between her fingers like a secret she could not afford to lose. Time stretched slowly, marked only by the distant sound of footsteps and the occasional voice echoing down the hallway. Then everything shifted. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and a group of people stepped out, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Expensive suits, controlled expressions, urgency masked behind authority. They moved with purpose, heading straight toward the nurse station. "Where is Ethan Carter?" a man's voice demanded, sharp and precise. Lily looked up. The man speaking was in his early 40s, composed, confident, his posture carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Beside him stood a woman, equally composed, her gaze scanning the room quickly, calculating, observant. Power had arrived. Within minutes, conversations began to overlap. Names were mentioned. Legal representatives, company stakes, emergency board notifications. The tone was not emotional. It was strategic. Lily remained seated, unnoticed as always, but she listened. That was what she had learned to do best. "We need full control of his medical decisions," the man said quietly but firmly. "Until he regains capacity." The nurse hesitated. "We will need proper authorization." "You will have it," the woman replied, already pulling out her phone. Lily's grip tightened slightly around the cloth in her hand. Control. That word echoed in her mind. Ethan had built his entire life around control. And now, in a matter of hours, it was being transferred to others. People who were not here when he collapsed. People who had not seen the warning signs. People who did not know what she knew. A few minutes later, the doctor returned, addressing the group now gathered. "Mr. Carter is stable for the moment, but his condition is still critical," he explained. "There are irregularities in his system that we cannot yet fully explain." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Explain what you can." The doctor paused briefly. There are signs that suggest a possible reaction to something external. We are running toxicology and medication interaction tests. Lily's heart skipped once. Reaction. External. The words aligned too closely with her suspicions. But before she could process further, the woman beside the man spoke again. We will assign a private medical consultant to oversee this. Her tone was calm, but final. Decisions were being made quickly. Too quickly. Lily stood slowly, her body moving before doubt could stop her. She took a step forward. Then another. The space between her and them felt larger than it should have, not because of distance, but because of what separated their worlds. Still, she spoke. There is something you need to see. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough to cut through the conversation. All eyes turned to her. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The man looked at her, confusion flickering into mild irritation. Who are you? He asked. Lily did not lower her gaze this time. I work in his home, she said. Not apologizing. Not shrinking. Just stating a fact. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. This is not the time, she said. If you have information, you can give it to hospital staff. Lily hesitated for only a second. Then she stepped forward one more time and carefully unwrapped the cloth in her hands. The small bottle rested in her palm, its label slightly misaligned under the harsh hospital lights. This was in his routine, she said. It should not have been. Silence followed. Different from before. Heavier. More focused. The man reached out, taking the bottle, turning it slowly in his hand. His expression shifted, just slightly. Not yet understanding, but no longer dismissing. The doctor stepped closer, examining it as well. Where did you get this? He asked. From his dining table, Lily replied. He has been taking it. Another silence. This time sharper. More dangerous. Because now, there was a possibility none of them had considered. The woman glanced at the man, something unspoken passing between them. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. Lily stepped back slightly, her role returning to the background, but the balance in the room had already changed. For the first time since they arrived, the conversation was no longer controlled by titles or authority. It was controlled by truth. And that truth had come from the one person no one had thought to listen to at all. The shift in the room did not go unnoticed, but it did not last long. Power had a way of correcting itself quickly. The man holding the bottle handed it to the doctor, his expression now controlled again, sharper, more guarded. Run a full analysis on this immediately, he said, his tone leaving no room for delay. The doctor nodded and turned away, already calling for a lab technician. For a brief moment, it seemed like Lily had been heard. But that moment passed just as quickly as it came. Thank you, the woman said, her voice polite but distant, already stepping back into her role. You can go now. Lily did not move. He has been taking it for days, she added, her voice still steady, but quieter now, as if she already understood what was coming next. The man glanced at her again, this time with a slight edge. And you noticed only now? He asked. It was not a question. It was a dismissal wrapped in formality. Lily met his gaze for a second, then answered simply. I noticed before. A pause followed. Not long, but enough to shift the tension slightly. Then why did you not report it earlier? The woman asked, her tone cooler now. Lily hesitated. The truth was simple, but saying it out loud felt heavier than it should have. Because no one would have listened, she said. Silence again. But this time, it was uncomfortable. The kind that exposed something no one wanted to acknowledge. The man exhaled slowly, then straightened. We will handle this from here, he said. Final. Closed. A boundary drawn clearly. Security, he added, without raising his voice. Within seconds, a hospital security guard approached, his posture polite but firm. Ma'am, you will need to step out of this area. Lily looked once toward the doors leading into the intensive care unit, then back at the people now surrounding the situation, already taking control, already rewriting the narrative without her. She nodded slowly. I understand. She did not argue. She did not push. She simply turned and walked away. The doors behind her felt heavier as they closed, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented. Inside, decisions were being made. Outside, she was once again invisible. The waiting area felt different now. Not just quiet, but distant. As if she had been pushed back into a place where her voice no longer mattered. Lily sat down again, her hands now empty, The cloth no longer wrapped around anything. For a moment, exhaustion crept in, heavier than before. She closed her eyes briefly, not to rest, but to steady herself. Then she opened them again. Clear. Focused. Because this was not over. Across the hallway, two nurses spoke in low voices, unaware that she could hear them. "They are bringing in a private consultant," one said. "Family request." The other nodded. That usually means something serious. Lily's gaze shifted slightly. Private consultant meant control. It meant the case would move out of standard protocol and into something more controlled, more restricted. Which also meant one thing. Information would become harder to reach, harder to challenge, harder to question. She stood slowly, her mind already moving ahead again. If she stayed here, she would be cut out completely. But if she left now, she might lose the only chance to prove what she already knew. Her eyes drifted toward the exit, then back toward the intensive care doors. For a brief moment, doubt tried to settle in. Who was she to interfere in something this big, this powerful? But then another thought replaced it. Clear, unshakable. She was the one who had been there. She was the one who had seen it before it happened. And she was the one who had kept him alive long enough for any of this to matter at all. That had to mean something. Lily turned and walked toward the nurse station, her steps steady, her posture quiet but firm. "I need to speak with the doctor again," she said. The nurse looked up, hesitation already forming. "I am sorry, but family only." Lily did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She simply held the gaze for a second longer than expected. "Then tell him this," she said calmly. The symptoms started after a change in his medication routine, and it was not prescribed. The nurse paused. Something in Lily's tone made her hesitate just enough. "I will pass it along," she said finally. Lily nodded once and stepped back again. Not inside. Not yet. But not gone either. Because even if they pushed her out, even if they refused to see her, she was not walking away from this. Not anymore. The night stretched into something heavier than time itself, each hour pressing down with quiet tension that refused to ease. Inside the intensive care unit, machines hummed in steady rhythm, their soft mechanical sounds marking the fragile line between stability and collapse. Ethan Carter lay motionless beneath the dimmed lights, his body still, but not at peace. Monitors tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every fluctuation that no longer belonged to his control. Outside, Lily remained where she had been, seated but alert, her mind refusing to rest. She had not left, not even for a moment, because something inside her would not allow it. Across the hall, movement increased. The private consultant had arrived. A man in his late 50s, calm, experienced, carrying the quiet authority of someone used to handling complex cases. He entered the restricted area without hesitation, followed closely by the same suited figures who had taken control earlier. Conversations resumed, quieter now, more focused, but still closed off from anyone outside their circle. Lily watched from a distance, unnoticed but aware. Minutes turned into another hour before the doctor reappeared, this time with the consultant beside him. Their expressions were serious, but different now. More certain. The man in the suit stepped forward immediately. "What do you have?" he asked. The consultant glanced briefly at the others before speaking. "We found irregular compounds in his system, not consistent with his prescribed medication." A pause. Heavy. Measured. "This is not accidental." The words settled into the air like a final confirmation. Lily's breath slowed slightly, not from relief, but from certainty. She had been right. But inside the circle of power, the reaction was not shock. It was calculation. The woman crossed her arms slightly, her gaze narrowing. "You are suggesting intentional interference," she said. "Yes," the consultant replied. "And it has been ongoing." The man's expression hardened. "Then we need to control information immediately." Control again. Always control. Lily stood slowly, the weight of those words pressing deeper. If they controlled the information, they would control the outcome. And if they controlled the outcome, the truth could be reshaped, redirected, or buried entirely. She had seen enough to understand that. A nurse passed by, carrying a chart, and Lily stepped slightly into her path. "Is he improving?" she asked quietly. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the restricted area before answering. "Not really. His condition is still unstable. The reaction has not fully stopped." Lily's chest tightened. That meant whatever was in his system was still affecting him. Still working. She stepped back again, her thoughts racing faster now. Across the room, the conversation shifted again, lower voices, sharper edges. "We cannot let this reach the board yet," the man said. "Not until we know who is responsible. Or until we decide what version of this becomes public," the woman added calmly. Lily's eyes lifted slightly. That sentence alone told her everything she needed to know. This was no longer just about saving Ethan. It was about protecting something bigger. The company, the power, the image. And in that equation, the truth was not always the priority. She turned her gaze back toward the intensive care doors. Inside, Ethan lay connected to machines, unaware of the decisions being made around him, unaware of how close he still was to losing everything. Not just his health, but control over his own life. Lily took a slow breath, steadying herself. If she did nothing, they would take over everything. If she stepped in, she risked being pushed out completely. But the choice no longer felt like one at all. Because this was not just about power. It was about right and wrong. About truth and consequence. About a man who had treated her like she was nothing, yet had unknowingly trusted her with his life in the moment it mattered most. And as she stood there, alone in a space that was never meant for her, one decision settled quietly but firmly inside her. She was not going to let them control this story without the truth. Not anymore. The moment Lily decided to act, everything around her seemed to sharpen into focus. The noise of the hospital faded into the background, replaced by a single, clear objective. Truth. Not controlled, not rewritten, not hidden behind polished words and legal authority. Just truth. She turned and walked toward the exit without hesitation, her steps steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. If the answers were not here, then she would find them where it all began. The penthouse. The ride back through the city felt longer than it should have. Rain still clung to the streets, reflecting the glow of traffic lights and passing cars, but Lily barely noticed. Her mind replayed every detail she had seen over the past days. The bottle, the label, the timing, the symptoms. None of it was random. By the time she reached the building, the lobby was quiet, the late hour leaving only a single receptionist behind the desk. He looked up briefly as she entered, then returned to his screen, uninterested. Invisible again, just the way she needed it. She moved quickly to the elevator, her reflection staring back at her from the polished metal doors. For a brief second, she saw not just a maid, but someone standing at the edge of something far bigger than herself. Then the doors opened, and the moment passed. The penthouse greeted her with the same cold silence as before, but now it felt different. Not empty. Waiting. Lily stepped inside and closed the door softly behind her. She did not turn on all the lights. Only the ones she needed. Shadows remained in the corners, stretching across the walls like quiet witnesses. She moved directly to the dining area. The bottles were still there, perfectly aligned, untouched since she had taken one earlier. She approached slowly, her fingers hovering before selecting another from the row. This time, she compared it carefully with one she knew was correct. Side by side. The difference was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. The alignment of the print, the texture of the label, even the slight variation in the seal. Someone had replaced them. Not carelessly, not quickly, but with precision. Someone who understood routine. Someone who knew Ethan's habits well enough to avoid suspicion. Lily's breath slowed as the realization settled deeper. This was not an outsider. This was someone close. Someone with access. She moved to the kitchen next, opening drawers, checking storage areas, scanning everything with new eyes. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then she noticed it. A small gap in the back of a cabinet, barely visible unless you were looking for it. She reached inside and pulled out a box she had never seen before. Inside were identical bottles. Dozens of them, all with the same slightly misaligned label. Her heart began to pound, not from fear, but from confirmation. This was planned, systematic, intentional. She closed the box carefully, her mind already moving ahead. Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway outside the penthouse. She froze instantly, her body going still as she listened. The sound passed, probably another resident, but it was enough to remind her of the risk. She could not stay here long. She returned everything exactly as she had found it, leaving no trace of her search. Then she took one of the altered bottles and wrapped it securely in cloth before placing it in her bag. Proof. Real proof. As she stepped back toward the door, Her eyes moved once more across the room. This place had always been controlled. Perfect. Untouchable. But now she could see the cracks clearly. Someone had been hiding in plain sight, manipulating everything from within. And Ethan had never seen it coming. Lily opened the door quietly and stepped out into the hallway, her expression calm, but her resolve stronger than ever. She was no longer just reacting. She was moving forward. Because now she did not just suspect the truth. She had found it. And the moment she returned to that hospital, everything was going to change. By the time Lily returned to the hospital, the sky outside had begun to lighten, the storm finally passing, but the tension inside had only grown heavier. The waiting area was no longer quiet. Voices carried sharper edges now, conversations more urgent, more controlled. She stepped inside without hesitation, her presence unnoticed at first, just another shadow moving through a place that did not belong to her. But this time, she was not empty-handed. The weight of the evidence in her bag steadied her steps. Across the room, the same group stood gathered, their posture rigid, their focus locked on the situation they were trying to contain. The man in the suit turned as she approached, recognition flashing briefly across his face, followed quickly by irritation. "You again," he said, his tone low, controlled. Lily did not stop walking. "You need to see this," she replied, her voice calm, but unyielding. The woman beside him exhaled slowly, clearly losing patience. "We already told you. This is no longer your concern." Lily reached into her bag and pulled out the bottle, then another, placing both into the man's hand before he could refuse. "It is my concern," she said quietly, "because this is not just one bottle." He looked down, his expression shifting as he compared them. The difference was small, but now that he was looking for it, it was impossible to ignore. The consultant stepped closer, taking one of the bottles, examining it carefully under the light. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "From his home," Lily answered. "There are dozens more." Silence followed. Not the dismissive silence from before. This was different. Focused. Dangerous. The man's jaw tightened slightly. "That is not possible," he said, but the certainty in his voice had already begun to crack. Lily held his gaze. "There is a hidden supply in the kitchen cabinet. Someone replaced his medication system entirely." The woman crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You are making a serious accusation," she said. Lily did not look away. "I am stating what I saw." The consultant spoke again, his tone more urgent now. "If what she is saying is true, then this is controlled exposure. Gradual. Designed to weaken him over time." The words settled heavily into the room. The man's eyes flickered briefly, calculating faster now. "Who has access to the penthouse?" he asked sharply. The question was no longer directed at Lily alone. It was directed at everyone. And that changed everything. A quiet shift passed through the group. No longer united. No longer aligned. Suspicion had entered the room. Lily stepped back slightly, her role complete for now, but her presence still steady. For the first time, she was not being pushed out. Because now, they needed what she knew. The consultant turned toward the doctor. "We need to adjust treatment immediately. This compound is still active in his system. If we do not counter it correctly, his condition will continue to deteriorate." The doctor nodded, already moving. "We will begin intervention now." As the medical team rushed back through the doors, the atmosphere shifted again, but this time it was no longer about control. It was about urgency. Real urgency. The man in the suit looked at Lily once more, his expression no longer dismissive. "If you are right," he said slowly, "then you may have just saved his life." Lily did not respond. She did not need to. Because inside that room, machines were already adjusting, treatments changing, decisions being made not based on power, but on truth. And for the first time since this began, the balance had shifted in the right direction. Not because of authority, not because of wealth, but because someone who had been overlooked had refused to stay silent when it mattered most. The change did not happen all at once. It came slowly, like the first light of morning pushing through darkness that had lasted too long. Inside the intensive care unit, machines adjusted their rhythm. New medications entered Ethan's system, carefully measured, precisely timed to counter what had been done to him. Doctors moved with renewed urgency, no longer guessing, no longer uncertain. They knew what they were fighting now, and that changed everything. Lily stood just outside the glass, her eyes fixed on him. He looked the same, still, pale, surrounded by wires and monitors, but something subtle had shifted. The tension in his body was different, less rigid, as if whatever had been pulling him down was beginning, slowly, to loosen its grip. Hours passed, but this time, they did not feel endless. They felt like movement, like progress. A nurse stepped out briefly, glancing at Lily before speaking. "His vitals are stabilizing," she said quietly. "It is working." Lily let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to it. Behind her, the atmosphere had changed as well. The same people who had once dismissed her now stood quieter, more measured, their confidence replaced with something more cautious. The man in the suit no longer spoke over others. The woman no longer issued immediate decisions. Because now, they understood that something had slipped through their control, and it had almost cost everything. The consultant stepped out again, his expression more composed than before. "The intervention is effective," he confirmed. "If his body continues to respond, he should regain consciousness." The words settled into the space with a quiet weight. Not dramatic, not loud, but powerful. Regain consciousness. The possibility of return. Lily's gaze moved back to Ethan, her chest tightening slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. For days, he had been a presence without awareness. A life suspended between control and loss. And now, that line was shifting. Inside the room, one of his hands moved. It was small, almost imperceptible, but Lily saw it immediately. Her body leaned forward slightly, her breath catching for a brief second. The nurse inside adjusted something, watching closely. Then it happened again. A slight movement of his fingers, followed by a faint change in the rhythm on the monitor. "He is responding," the nurse said, her voice calm but alert. Lily did not move. She did not speak. She simply watched, her eyes locked on the smallest sign of life returning. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, Ethan's eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to break through the silence that had held him for so long. The room shifted instantly. Nurses moved closer, voices low but urgent, checking his response, adjusting the equipment. But through all of it, his gaze moved, unfocused at first, searching without direction. Until it stopped. At the glass. At her. Lily froze for a moment, not expecting it, not prepared for the way his eyes seemed to recognize something before his mind fully could. He did not speak. He could not. But there was something there. Not authority. Not distance. Something else. Something raw. Confused. And beneath it, something that had not existed before. Awareness. The consultant stepped closer to the bed, speaking calmly. "Ethan, you are in the hospital. You are safe." But Ethan's gaze did not move away. Not yet. As if in that moment, without words, without explanation, some part of him understood what had happened. Or at least who had been there when it did. Lily stood still, her hands at her sides, her expression quiet. Steady. She did not step forward. She did not call out to him. She simply stayed where she had always been. Present. Unseen. Until now. And as the machines continued their steady rhythm, marking his return to a world he had nearly lost, one truth settled clearly between them. He was alive. And he was not alone anymore. The days that followed did not return to what they had been before, because something fundamental had shifted, something that could not be undone. Ethan Carter recovered slowly, not with the sharp control that had once defined him, but with a quiet awareness that settled deeper with each passing hour. The hospital room no longer felt like a place of power, but a place of truth, where nothing could be hidden behind status or authority. He spent long moments in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because for the first time, he was forced to confront what he had never allowed himself to see. And at the center of that realization was one person. Lily did not stay in the spotlight after that moment. She returned to her place at the edge of the room, the same way she always had. She checked on him when the nurses were occupied, adjusted what needed to be adjusted, spoke only when necessary. But everything was different now, because this time he saw her. Not as a shadow, not as a function, but as the one constant presence that had never left. The investigation moved quickly once the truth could no longer be controlled. Access records were reviewed. Staff were questioned. And the answer, when it came, was as precise as the plan itself. The man who had stood at the center of control from the beginning, the one who had spoken first, who had demanded authority, had been the one behind it all. A calculated attempt to weaken Ethan slowly, to take control before anyone realized what was happening. When the truth surfaced, it did not explode. It settled. Quiet, undeniable, final. He was removed immediately. No arguments. No second chances. Power, once lost that way, did not return. The woman who had stood beside him said nothing as it happened. Her silence spoke more than words ever could. In the days that followed, Ethan was discharged from the hospital under strict supervision, his recovery continuing back in the place where everything had begun. But the penthouse no longer felt the same. The air was different, lighter, but also more honest. The illusion of perfection had been broken, and in its place was something real. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the glass walls, Ethan stood near the window, his posture no longer rigid, but thoughtful. Behind him, Lily moved quietly through the room, finishing her routine the way she always did. But this time, he turned before she could disappear. "Lily," he said, her name, spoken clearly. She paused, her hand still resting lightly against the edge of the table. Slowly, she turned to face him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because there were too many things that could be said, and none of them felt simple enough. Finally, Ethan took a step forward, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "I was wrong." The words were not dramatic. They were not polished. But they were real. About you. About everything. Lily did not respond immediately. She simply held his gaze, steady, calm, the same way she always had. Then she gave a small nod. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just acknowledgement. Because she had never needed his apology to do what was right. Ethan exhaled slowly, then continued. "You saved my life." This time, the silence that followed was different. Not heavy, not tense, but honest. Lily looked at him for a moment longer, then spoke softly. "I did what needed to be done. That was all. No pride, no demand, just truth." And somehow, that made it mean more. Ethan gave a faint nod, understanding something he had never understood before. That value was not measured by status. That loyalty could not be bought. That the person he had overlooked had been the only one who truly saw him when it mattered. Outside, the city continued as it always had, loud and endless and full of movement. But inside that quiet space, something had changed permanently. Not just in circumstance, but in perspective. And as Lily turned to leave the room, returning to her quiet rhythm, Ethan watched her go, no longer seeing someone invisible, but someone irreplaceable. Not because of what she had done, but because of who she had always been.